Emmanuel's hands trembled as the plane touched down on American soil. After 26 hours of travel from Lagos, his body ached, but hope pushed exhaustion aside. Through the small oval window, he watched airport workers scurry across the tarmac like busy ants. This new world, with its gleaming buildings and orderly systems, already felt different from home. He straightened his best button-down shirt, navy blue with thin white stripes, ironed meticulously before his journey. The fabric had worn thin at the elbows, but it was clean and proper. First impressions mattered. His future wife would be waiting. The mail-order groom service had matched them 3 months ago. Margaret Wilson, age 43, successful real estate agent from suburban Pennsylvania, seeking companionship and family. Her profile mentioned a spacious 4-bedroom home, a love of cooking, and a desire for children before it was too late. His profile highlighted his engineering degree from University of Lagos, his fluent English, and his dream of working in America's tech industry. Their emails had been formal but warm. She seemed pleased with his educational background and his traditional values. He had been honest about everything, including his photo, which clearly showed his deep brown skin and broad Nigerian features. She had sent a picture too, blonde, hair cut in a neat bob, wide smile standing beside a flowering bush in a garden. Emmanuel took a deep breath as he followed the crowd toward immigration. His temporary visa was in order, a fiancé visa that would allow him 90 days to marry Margaret before applying for permanent residency. Every document was carefully tucked into a folder in his carry-on bag. The immigration officer studied, his passport longer than seemed necessary. "Purpose of your visit?" "I am here to marry my fiancée, ma'am," Emmanuel said, his accent thickening with nervousness. After more questions and a long wait, he was cleared to enter the United States of America. His heart pounded as he collected his single suitcase, everything he owned in the world, and headed toward the arrival area. The crowd of waiting people made him pause. Faces scanned the arriving passengers. Drivers held signs with names. Families embraced returning relatives. Emmanuel searched for Margaret's blonde hair and wide smile. He spotted her standing slightly apart from the crowd, checking her watch. She wore a beige dress and matching jacket that looked expensive. Her hair was just as in the photo, but her smile was nowhere to be seen. Emmanuel approached her, wheeling his worn suitcase behind him. "Margaret," he said, extending his hand. "I am Emmanuel. It is wonderful to finally meet you." Her eyes widened. She took a small step back. "Emmanuel Okafor?" "Yes, that is me." He smiled wider, thinking perhaps his accent had confused her. Margaret's expression shifted from surprise to something harder. She glanced around as if checking who might be watching them. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice tight. Emmanuel's smile faltered. "Mistake? No, I am Emmanuel. We have been writing for 3 months. I have your letters." He reached for his bag. "Stop," she said, holding up her hand. You're not what I expected." The words hung in the air between them. Emmanuel felt his stomach drop. "I do not understand." "You're black," Margaret said, lowering her voice on the last word. "Your profile must have used someone else's picture." Emmanuel's confusion deepened. "No, that was my photo. I would never lie." "Well, something got mixed up. This isn't going to work." She clutched her purse tighter. "I can't do this." People were beginning to look their way. Emmanuel felt heat rising in his face. Not anger, but shame. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. "Please," he said quietly. "I have traveled very far. Perhaps we can talk about this?" "There's nothing to discuss." Margaret's voice had turned cold. "The agency messed up. I specifically indicated my preferences and they ignored them." The meaning of her words became clear. It wasn't a mix-up. She had seen his picture but somehow convinced herself he wasn't really African. Or perhaps she'd simply ignored what was in front of her until forced to confront reality. "I sold everything to come here," Emmanuel said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "My apartment, my mother's jewelry. I have nowhere to return to." For a moment, something like guilt flickered across Margaret's face. Then she opened her purse, pulled out $200 bills and thrust them at him. This should help until you can figure something out. I'm sorry, but I can't take you home with me. My neighbors, my family. It's just not what I signed up for. Emmanuel didn't take the money. His engineer's mind was already calculating. Hotel costs, food, return airfare if necessary. $200 would barely last 2 days. The agency has a responsibility, he said. Please, can we call them together? I've already texted my contact there. They'll reach out to you. Margaret backed away another step. I have to go now. Good luck. And with that, she turned and walked briskly toward the exit, leaving Emmanuel standing alone with his suitcase amid the happy reunions happening all around him. He watched her disappear through the automatic doors, too stunned to move. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly seemed harsh. The excited chatter of the crowd faded to a dull roar in his ears. In Lagos, he had been respected, a university graduate from a good family. Here, in an instant, he had been reduced to his skin color. The careful plans he'd made over many months had collapsed in a 60-second conversation. Emmanuel found a plastic chair against a wall and sat down heavily. He still held his folder of documents, visa papers, copies of emails, the contract with the International Marriage Agency. Words on paper that now meant nothing. A cleaning woman pushing a trash bin gave him a sympathetic look as she passed. She was an older black woman with gray hair tucked under a scarf. She nodded at him with understanding in her eyes, as if she'd witnessed this scene before. That small human connection broke something in him. Emmanuel bent forward, elbows on knees, and covered his face with his hands. He would not cry here. He would not. After several deep breaths, he straightened up and pulled out his phone. The international SIM card wouldn't work here. He had planned to get an American phone with Margaret's help. Another assumption now proven false. The airport information desk directed him to a place where he could buy a temporary phone card. With his limited funds, Emmanuel purchased the cheapest option available. He needed to make exactly 2 calls, one to the marriage agency and one to his cousin Thomas, who had immigrated to Boston 3 years ago. The agency put him on hold repeatedly before a representative finally spoke with him. They expressed regrets about the miscommunication, but explained that their policy covered matchmaking only, not guarantees about final outcomes. When Emmanuel asked about a refund of his substantial agency fee, the representative mentioned a no-refund clause in the contract fine print. His cousin Thomas didn't answer. Emmanuel left a brief, carefully worded message explaining his situation without going into humiliating details. Night had fallen outside the airport windows. Emmanuel bought a bottle of water and a sandwich that cost 4 times what it would in Nigeria. He found a quiet corner where other stranded travelers had settled with their luggage. As he chewed the bland sandwich, Emmanuel watched planes take off into the dark sky, their lights blinking smaller and smaller until they disappeared. Each one could take him home, if home still existed for him. But a return ticket would cost more than he had. And going back, without success, would mean facing his entire extended family, who had pooled resources to support his journey, believing in his promise to bring them to America one by one. His phone buzzed. Thomas had texted back, "Stay there. I'll call my friend in Philly. Hang tight, cousin." Emmanuel closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. One connection in this vast country, one thin thread of hope. 2 hours later, Thomas's friend Kwame arrived. He was a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, driving an old Honda with a cracked windshield. Thomas called, said you needed a place, Kwame said simply, helping Emmanuel with his suitcase. I have a couch. Not much, but better than airport floor. Thank you, Emmanuel said, the words inadequate for his gratitude. I will find work quickly and not burden you. Kwame gave him a long look as they drove away from the airport. It's not easy here, my brother. Not like they tell us back home. But we look out for each other. Always have, always will. As they drove through the night toward Kwame's apartment, Emmanuel watched the American landscape pass by. Highways, storefronts, billboards advertising perfect lives. The rejection at the airport had been crushing, but perhaps it had also been a gift, tearing away illusions and showing him the reality he would need to face. His new life was beginning, just not in the way he had imagined. He touched the inner pocket where he kept his engineering degree. That at least was real. His knowledge was real. His determination was real. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the first day of building something from nothing. Emmanuel stared at the stained ceiling of Kwame's living room. 6 weeks had passed since his arrival in America. 6 weeks of sleeping on a lumpy couch in a one-bedroom apartment shared with 3 other men. 6 weeks of searching for a job that matched his qualifications, only to face closed doors and polite rejections. His temporary visa was a problem. Companies wouldn't sponsor him without experience in America. He couldn't get experience without a job. The perfect trap. "You need to lower your standards, brother," Kwame had told him after the 5th rejection. "Start somewhere, anywhere. Pride won't pay the bills." Emmanuel had nodded, swallowing the bitter pill of reality. His engineering degree from University of Lagos, earned through years of late nights and sacrifice, meant nothing here, less than nothing. It was almost a mark against him, making potential employers view him as overqualified for menial work, yet underqualified for professional positions. This morning, he would start his new job as a janitor at Tech Vision Enterprises, a mid-sized software company in the city. The position paid $11.50 per hour, barely enough to afford a shared room in a safer neighborhood, but a start nonetheless. "You're up early," Kwame mumbled from the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Despite the cramped quarters, his friend had never complained about Emmanuel's presence. "First day," Emmanuel replied, folding the thin blanket neatly. "I want to arrive 30 minutes early to make a good impression." Kwame chuckled. "They're not going to promote you to CEO on day 1, you know." "Every opportunity has hidden doors," Emmanuel said, repeating one of his father's favorite proverbs. "You just need the right key to find them." The bus ride to Tech Vision took 45 minutes and required 1 transfer. Emmanuel used the time to study, not engineering techs anymore, but YouTube tutorials on proper American cleaning techniques and janitorial best practices. If this was his job now, he would be the best at it he could possibly be. The Tech Vision building surprised him. Not the gleaming glass tower he had imagined, but a renovated warehouse with exposed brick walls and industrial-style windows. The reception area featured reclaimed wood furniture and plants growing in old computer shells. Young people in casual clothes tapped away at laptops or huddled in conversation clusters. The facilities manager, Harold, was a gray-haired man with stooped shoulders and a no-nonsense attitude. He led Emmanuel to a small supply closet that smelled of chemicals and damp mops. "This will be your home base," Harold explained, handing him a ring of keys. "Morning shift runs 5 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. You'll clean bathrooms, break rooms, and common areas before most employees arrive. Conference rooms get attention between meetings. Trash goes out back." "Questions?" Emmanuel shook his head, memorizing the details. "Your uniform's in there," Harold continued, pointing to a locker. "Nothing fancy, just a company polo and work pants. Your papers say you've got a degree in engineering?" Emmanuel straightened slightly. "Yes, sir. Electrical engineering with focus on systems design." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Huh. Well, the mop doesn't care about your degree. Just make sure you don't mess with any of the tech equipment while cleaning. Some of these rooms have prototypes worth more than you'll make in 10 years. "I understand, sir. I will be careful." Harold's expression softened slightly. "Look, I've seen your type before. Educated folks who hit hard times. Word of advice: do your job well, keep your head down, and don't go telling the engineers how to do their work. That's the fastest way to get shown the door." Emmanuel nodded, though the advice stung. Back home, he had led a team designing electrical systems for a new university building. Now he would be emptying their trash cans and scrubbing their toilet bowls. The first week passed in a blur of monotonous tasks. Wake up at 3:30 a.m., bus at 4:15, arrive at 5. Clean bathrooms, vacuum floors, wipe surfaces, empty trash. Avoid eye contact with arriving employees who barely noticed his existence. By the second week, Emmanuel had established a routine that allowed him to finish his morning tasks more efficiently. He used the extra time to observe the building's electrical and HVAC systems, noting inefficiencies in the older section of the warehouse. The air conditioning struggled during warmer days, causing complaints he overheard while cleaning nearby. 1. Morning. Emmanuel arrived to find a small crisis in progress. Harold and a maintenance worker were examining a puddle spreading across the main conference room floor. Leaks coming from somewhere in the ceiling, the maintenance man was saying. Probably condensation from that old AC unit. We'll need to shut it down for repairs, but that means no cooling for today's big client meeting. Harold looked stressed. The CEO is presenting to potential investors. No AC in September? They'll be roasting. Emmanuel hesitated, then spoke up. Excuse me, sir, I might be able to help. Both men turned, surprised to hear from the janitor they barely acknowledged most days. The problem is likely condensation buildup in the drainage line, Emmanuel explained. In Nigeria, we face this issue often. There's a simple fix that might work temporarily. Harold looked skeptical but desperate. What do you have in mind? 30 minutes later, Emmanuel had created a temporary solution using materials from the maintenance closet. He'd cleaned the drainage line, adjusted the drip pan, and rerouted the condensation away from the ceiling tiles. It's not permanent, he explained as the puddle stopped growing. But it should hold through your meeting. The system needs proper maintenance when you have more time. Harold stared at him with new eyes. Where did you learn to do that? I told you, I am an engineer. Emmanuel said it simply, without pride or bitterness. From that day, Harold began to treat Emmanuel differently, not quite as an equal, but as someone with unexpected value. He assigned Emmanuel to areas where his observant eye might catch problems before they developed into crises. During his break times, Emmanuel would sit alone in the corner of the employee cafeteria, watching the young programmers and designers collaborate at nearby tables. They spoke a language of code and concepts he understood only partially, but he listened and learned, connecting their conversations to articles he read at night on his cheap smartphone. One afternoon, while cleaning the whiteboard in a small meeting room, Emmanuel noticed a diagram of a circuit design. Something about the layout caught his attention, an inefficiency in the power management system that would cause overheating under certain conditions. Without thinking, he picked up a marker and made a small annotation in the corner of the board, suggesting a simple modification that would improve efficiency by at least 15%. He immediately regretted it. What was he thinking, correcting the work of actual employed engineers? He quickly wiped away his note and finished cleaning the room, heart pounding. The next day, Emmanuel found a sticky note attached to his locker. Who cleaned room 4 yesterday afternoon? PV. His stomach dropped. Someone had noticed his presumptuous correction. This could cost him his job. Harold's warning echoed in his mind. Don't go telling the engineers how to do their work, for you. 3 days, Emmanuel avoided room 4 and jumped whenever his name was called. On the 4th day, Harold cornered him in the supply closet. Victoria Hayes wants to see you, he said, mentioning the company's founder and CEO as casually as if she were a fellow janitor. Me? Emmanuel's voice cracked. Why? Harold shrugged. Above my pay grade. Her office, 2 p.m. The next few hours passed in anxious anticipation. Emmanuel cleaned the same spot in the lobby 3 times, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Would she fire him personally? Was that how things worked in America? At precisely 2 p.m., he stood outside Victoria Hayes's office, having changed into his cleanest uniform shirt. He knocked softly. Come in, called a clear voice. The office surprised him, practical and modest rather than luxurious. Victoria Hayes was a black woman in her early 40s with close-cropped hair and intelligent eyes. She sat behind a desk covered with papers and device prototypes. You're Emmanuel, she said. It wasn't a question. Please, sit down. He perched nervously on the edge of a chair, hands folded in his lap. Do you know why I wanted to see you? She asked. I believe I made a mistake, he admitted. I wrote on a whiteboard in room 4, it was not my place, I apologize. Victoria tilted her head. Actually, what you wrote saved us from a significant design flaw. Paul, our lead hardware engineer, was quite impressed that someone spotted an issue his entire team missed. She studied him with curiosity. Harold tells me you're an engineer. I was in Nigeria. Here, I am a janitor. And why is that? Emmanuel explained his situation briefly. The visa issues, the rejected applications, the need for income while he figured out next steps. Victoria listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded thoughtfully. We have a problem at Tech Vision, she said. We think like Americans, design for Americans, and miss perspectives that could open new markets. Our power management system, the one you corrected, was being designed for environments with stable electricity. Your solution makes it more adaptable to fluctuating power conditions. Emmanuel nodded. In Lagos, we deal with power outages weekly. Our designs must account for this reality. Exactly. Victoria leaned forward. I'd like you to consult with our hardware team 2 afternoons a week. We'll adjust your janitorial schedule and pay you an additional consulting fee. It's not a full engineering position, your visa won't allow that. But it's a start. Emmanuel blinked, certain he had misheard. You want my input on your designs? I want your perspective and expertise, Victoria corrected. Different experiences lead to different solutions. We've been limited by our sameness. For the first time since arriving in America, Emmanuel felt a glimmer of his old confidence returning. Someone saw his value beyond his ability to clean floors and empty trash. I would be honored, he said, his voice steady. As he left Victoria's office, Emmanuel noticed a photograph on her wall he hadn't seen before. A much younger Victoria standing proudly beside a cleaning cart, wearing the uniform of a janitorial service. Some paths weren't straight lines, he realized. Sometimes they doubled back and zigzagged before leading to their true destination. As he returned to his mop and bucket, they no longer felt like symbols of failure but tools on a journey that was only beginning. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Tech Vision's main development lab. Emmanuel carefully wiped down the empty desks, collecting forgotten coffee cups and arranging scattered pens. 4 months had passed since Victoria Hayes had invited him to consult with the hardware team. 4 months of living in 2 worlds, janitor by morning, respected, voice in technical meetings by afternoon. Today was different, though. The hardware team was presenting their new power management system to potential investors, a system that incorporated several of Emmanuel's suggestions for making the technology more adaptable to unstable electrical grids. Victoria had asked him to attend the presentation, but he hesitated. His work visa situation remained complicated, and drawing attention to himself felt risky. You can watch from the observation room, she had told him. No one needs to know your role. I just want you to see what you helped create. So now, as he finished his cleaning rounds, Emmanuel checked his watch. The presentation would begin in 15 minutes. He slipped into the small room adjoining the main conference area, where a one-way glass window allowed him to observe without being seen. The investment team filed in, men and women in expensive suits carrying leather portfolios and sleek tablets. They greeted Victoria with the cautious respect reserved for someone they weren't quite sure what to make of. As a self-made tech CEO and a black woman, Victoria Hayes defied easy categorization. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria began, what you're about to see represents a fundamental shift in how we approach power management for developing markets. Our FlexGrid technology can operate in conditions that would fry conventional systems. The lead engineer Paul took over, explaining the technical aspects while demonstrating a prototype. Emmanuel watched with quiet pride as Paul highlighted features that had originated from his experiences in Nigeria. Protective circuits that anticipated power surges, energy storage components that released power gradually during outages, and adaptive software that learned from local conditions. One investor, a thin man with steel-rimmed glasses, raised his hand. Impressive engineering, but I'm not seeing the market potential. Most of our tech customers have reliable power. Victoria, smiled. That's precisely the point. We've been designing for markets that are already saturated.
Meanwhile, there are billions of potential customers in regions where power infrastructure is unreliable. People who need technology that works in their reality, not ours. She displayed a map showing electrical grid reliability worldwide. Red.
Zones indicating frequent outages covered much of Africa, parts of Asia, and rural sections of South America. This isn't just a humanitarian pitch. It's about tapping into emerging markets before our competitors realize the opportunity. Emmanuel nodded to himself. Victoria understood what many American businesses missed. That adaptation to local conditions wasn't charity but smart business. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. The rain falls differently on different roofs, but all must find ways to collect water. As the presentation continued, the door to the observation room quietly opened. Harold, the facilities manager, poked his head in. "There you are," he whispered. "Toilet on the second floor is backing up. Needs immediate attention." Emmanuel's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded. This was his reality. Consultant or not, he was still the janitor. "I'll get my tools." As he followed Harold into the hallway, he heard applause from the conference room. The presentation had been well received. He should feel satisfaction in that, even if he couldn't stay to see it. An hour later, after resolving the plumbing issue, Emmanuel returned to his cleaning cart in the main hallway. As he rounded the corner, he nearly collided with Victoria and the investment team leaving the conference room. "And here's the man himself," Victoria said suddenly, stopping the group. "Emmanuel, these investors were just asking who came up with the adaptive power cycling feature. I mentioned it was your insight." Emmanuel froze, mop still in hand, uniform, slightly damp from the plumbing work. The investors stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity. "This is your engineering consultant?" asked the man with steel-rimmed glasses, eyebrow raised. Victoria's gaze hardened slightly. "Emmanuel has been providing valuable technical insights based on his experience as an electrical engineer in Nigeria. His perspective has been instrumental in helping us understand the challenges of operating in markets with unstable infrastructure." The man looked Emmanuel up and down, taking in the janitorial uniform. "And he also cleans the office?" Before Victoria could respond, Emmanuel straightened his shoulders and spoke directly. "Yes, I do both. In my country there is a saying, knowledge has no uniform. I am fortunate that Ms. Hayes recognizes this truth." A moment of awkward silence followed. Then a woman in the investment group, older than the others with silver hair and keen eyes, stepped forward. "Resourcefulness and multiple perspectives on a single team. I like it." She extended her hand to Emmanuel. "Diane Chen, Horizon Partners. Your power cycling solution is brilliant in its simplicity. I'd love to hear more about your engineering background sometime." Emmanuel shook her hand, momentarily at a loss for words. "Thank you, that's very kind." As the group continued down the hallway, Emmanuel caught Victoria's eye. She gave him a small nod, part apology, part something else. Pride, perhaps. Later that afternoon, as Emmanuel was changing out of his uniform in the small locker room, Victoria appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry about putting you on the spot earlier," she said. "It wasn't my intention to make you uncomfortable." Emmanuel shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. You gave me credit for my work. That is more than most would do." Victoria leaned against the door frame. Chen was impressed. Horizon Partners is one of the biggest investment firms on the East Coast. "That is good for Tech Vision," Emmanuel said, carefully. "It could be good for you too." Victoria pulled a folder from under her arm and handed it to him. "Our legal team has been looking into options for your visa situation. There might be a path forward. An O1 visa for individuals with extraordinary ability. It's not easy to get, but with my company's sponsorship and your qualifications, we have a chance." Emmanuel opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were legal documents, application forms, and a formal letter offering him a position as a technical consultant at a salary that made his eyes widen. "I can't promise success," Victoria continued. "Immigration is complicated, but I believe in investing in talent regardless of how it comes to us." Emmanuel struggled to find words. Why would you do this for me? Victoria was quiet for a moment. Do you know how I started Tech Vision? He shook his head. I was working as a night cleaner at a tech firm while taking community college classes during the day. One night I overheard engineers discussing a problem they couldn't solve. I left a note with my solution. They laughed it off. Who would listen to the cleaning lady? But the problem persisted, and eventually, they tried my approach. It worked. She smiled at the memory. The company offered me an entry-level position but with limitations. I was good enough to solve their problems but not to advance beyond a certain point. So I left and started my own company. Now I make the rules. Emmanuel understood then. She saw herself in him. Not charity, but recognition. There's a team meeting. Tomorrow at 10, Victoria said, moving toward the door. Not as a consultant this time. As our newest technical team member, if you accept, of course. After she left, Emmanuel sat on the bench for a long time, folder clutched in his hands. Through the small, high window of the locker room, he could see a patch of sky turning orange with sunset. He thought about calling his mother with the news, but stopped himself. Better to wait until things were certain. Hope was a fragile thing in his experience, easily crushed by reality. That evening, instead of taking his usual bus to the apartment he now shared with just one roommate, Emmanuel walked. The city streets were filled with the usual rush hour, bustle, people heading home from work, stopping at grocery stores, picking up children from daycare. Normal lives that had seemed so far from his grasp just months ago. He passed a small park where children played on swings while parents watched. From nearby benches, a group of teenagers practiced dance moves near a boombox. An old man fed pigeons from a paper bag, all of them existing in their own worlds, carrying their own stories. Emmanuel's phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Kwame. Heard the news. From Harold. Celebration dinner at my place tonight, no excuses. Word traveled fast at Tech Vision. Harold must have overheard Victoria's conversation with Emmanuel. He texted back a thank you and continued walking. His mind drifted back to that first day at the airport. Margaret's rejection, the humiliation, the fear. At the time, it had felt like his American dream shattering before it even began. Now he wondered if it had been necessary. That broken, beginning making space for something more authentic to grow. Emmanuel stopped at a small convenience store and bought a calling card. Outside, he dialed his mother's number in Lagos. Despite the cost, he suddenly needed to hear her voice. Emmanuel, she answered, the connection crackling slightly. Is everything all right? It's late here. Everything is fine, Mama, he said, emotion making his voice rough. Better than fine, I have news. As he told her about the job offer and visa possibility, he could hear her soft crying turn to sounds of joy. She began singing a praise song, her voice carrying across thousands of miles to reach him on a street corner in America. Your father would be so proud, she said when she calmed. He always said you would make your own path. It's not certain. Yet, Emmanuel cautioned. The visa process is difficult, but you have found someone who sees your value, his mother replied. That is more precious than any paper or permit. After ending the call, Emmanuel continued his walk with lighter steps. The sun had fully set now and city lights twinkled all around him, from office buildings, apartments, restaurants, and cars. Different kinds of light, but all pushing back the darkness in their own way. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The technical team would view him differently once they realized he was joining their ranks permanently. Some would welcome him. Others might resist. The visa process would be long and uncertain. But tonight, Emmanuel allowed himself to feel something he had almost forgotten, possibility. As he approached Kwame's apartment building, he saw his friend waiting on the steps, a wide grin on his face. Behind him, several other West African immigrants from their community stood with a hand-painted sign. Congratulations, Engineer Okafor. Emmanuel laughed, embarrassed by the attention yet moved by the gesture. These men and women had supported him through the hardest months, sharing food when he couldn't afford groceries, offering advice about American customs, listening to his frustrations and fears. Speech, someone called as Emmanuel climbed the steps. He shook his head, still smiling. No speech, just gratitude. Kwame threw an arm around his shoulders. From janitor to engineer in 4 months. You're making the rest of us look bad, my friend. I am still a janitor until the paperwork is final, Emmanuel reminded him. And there is honor in all work that is done with care. Always the philosopher, Kwame teased, leading him inside where the small apartment was crowded with well-wishers and the rich smells of West African cooking. As plates were filled and stories shared, Emmanuel looked around at these faces. All strivers, all dreamers who had come to America seeking something better. Some had found it, some were still searching. All had faced barriers and setbacks along the way. To new beginnings, he said quietly, raising his glass of ginger beer. And to those who see our true value, added an older woman, nodding knowingly. The room filled with sounds of agreement, glasses clinking and laughter that carried up toward the ceiling and beyond, into the vast American night. The immigration lawyer's office smelled of lemon polish and old books. Emmanuel sat with perfect posture in an uncomfortable chair, hands folded neatly in his lap. Across the desk, Victoria studied a document through reading glasses, occasionally making notes in the margin. The good news, said Attorney Wilson, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, is that we have a strong case for your O1 visa. Your engineering background is solid, and Ms. Hayes's company sponsorship carries significant weight. Emmanuel nodded, not yet allowing himself to feel relief. And the bad news? The lawyer smiled slightly. I didn't say there was bad news, but there are complications. Your entry as a fiancé visa applicant raised some flags when it fell through. We'll need to explain that situation thoroughly. Emmanuel's stomach tightened. He had told Victoria about Margaret's rejection, but not the complete humiliation of that day. Now it would need to be documented, his shame becoming an official part of his story in America. Whatever is necessary, he said quietly. Victoria looked up from her reading. Is there anything in Emmanuel's current arrangement that puts him at risk while we wait for approval? He's still technically on a fiancé visa that was meant for a marriage that never happened. The lawyer folded his hands. As long as he filed the proper paperwork about the change in circumstances, which he did, he's allowed to remain while his case is being considered. However, he's in a gray area regarding employment. The consulting arrangement was already pushing boundaries. I can continue my janitorial work, Emmanuel offered quickly, until everything is resolved. Victoria shook her head. That's not happening. Tech Vision needs your engineering expertise full-time. We'll find a way to make this work, she turned to the lawyer. What about classifying him as an independent contractor for now, or routing his work through our international office? As they discussed legal options, Emmanuel's mind wandered to how much had changed in 8 months. From sleeping on Kwame's couch to renting his own small studio apartment. From being invisible to having his ideas shape company projects. From sending desperate job applications to receiving recruiting calls from other tech firms who'd heard about his work. Emmanuel, Victoria's voice pulled him back to the present. Alan asked if you have any documentation of your engineering work in Nigeria. Project reports, commendations, anything official. Emmanuel hesitated. Most of my papers were left behind. I brought only my degree and a few letters of recommendation, but... He paused, remembering something. My former supervisor might still have our project files. I could contact him. That would be extremely helpful, the lawyer confirmed. The more evidence we can provide of your extraordinary ability, the stronger our case. Later that afternoon, back at Tech Vision, Emmanuel sat at his new desk in the engineering department. The space was still strange to him. His own computer, his name on the door, colleagues who now asked his opinion instead of ignoring his presence. He still half expected someone to hand him a mop and tell him there had been a mistake. His phone buzzed with a message from Paul, the lead hardware engineer. Meeting in 10. Bringing new concept for Nigerian market expansion. Need your eyes. Emmanuel smiled to himself. 6 months ago, Paul had barely acknowledged him while he cleaned the lab. Now Paul routinely sought his input, especially as Tech Vision explored opportunities in African markets. The meeting room was already half full when Emmanuel arrived. He took a seat next to Aisha, a brilliant software developer who had been the first to welcome him to the team without reservations. "Ready for another round of Explain Africa to the Americans?" she whispered with a wink. Born to Nigerian parents, but raised in Boston, Aisha often joked that Emmanuel was her cultural translator for a homeland she knew only through family stories. "As long as no one asks if I grew up with lions again," he whispered back. Paul entered with Victoria and several other executives Emmanuel didn't recognize. The energy in the room shifted. Something important was happening. "Thanks for coming on short notice," Victoria began. "I'd like to introduce Diane Chen from Horizon Partners, whom some of you met during our investor presentation, and her associates." Emmanuel straightened. Diane Chen, the investor who had shown interest in his background months ago. She nodded, in his direction with a hint of recognition. "Horizon Partners is considering a significant investment in Tech Vision," Victoria continued, "specifically focused on our expansion into emerging markets. They've asked for a presentation on our strategy for West Africa, with particular emphasis on our adaptive power technology." Paul clicked to his first slide, showing maps of Nigeria's electrical grid coverage. "As you can see, even major cities experience frequent outages. Our FlexGrid technology addresses this with..." As the presentation continued, Emmanuel felt a strange mix of emotions. They were discussing his homeland as a market opportunity, analyzing its challenges as problems to solve for profit. Yet the solutions they proposed would genuinely improve life for many Nigerians. Was this exploitation or progress? Perhaps both at once. Diane Chen interrupted with a sharp question. "Your competitors are also eyeing these markets. What's your unique advantage?" Victoria smiled. "That's where our secret weapon comes in." She gestured toward Emmanuel. "Emmanuel doesn't just understand the technical challenges of these environments, he's lived them. His insights have already transformed our product design. Now he's helping us build relationships with local partners who can help us navigate the complex business landscape." Emmanuel felt all eyes turn to him. "We've initiated conversations with 3 telecommunications companies in Lagos," he said, finding his professional voice. "They're interested in bundling our power management systems with their mobile products. The key is understanding that, in Nigeria, people prioritize communication over consistent electricity. They will invest in keeping their phones charged even when home power is unreliable." Diane nodded thoughtfully. "And what about manufacturing? Shipping costs eat into margins, significantly. We're exploring assembly partnerships in the free trade zone outside Lagos," Emmanuel explained. "Components would still come from our factories, but final assembly would happen locally, creating jobs and reducing shipping costs." As the meeting progressed, Emmanuel found himself taking a central role in the discussion. Victoria kept deferring to him on questions about implementation, cultural considerations, and market priorities. This wasn't just courtesy, she genuinely valued his perspective. By the time the meeting ended, Diane Chen was nodding with satisfaction. "This is exactly the kind of informed approach we look for. Too many companies enter these markets with American assumptions and wonder why they fail." As everyone filed out, Victoria held Emmanuel back. "That was impressive," she said once they were alone. "You've come a long way from leaving engineering notes on whiteboards." "Thank you for the opportunity to contribute," he replied formally, still not entirely comfortable with praise. "It's more than contribution," Victoria said seriously. "I want you to lead our West African initiative, full responsibility for strategy and implementation. Once your visa situation is sorted, of course." Emmanuel stared at her, certain he had misheard. "Lead? But I've only been on the engineering team for a few months. And in that time, you've demonstrated more insight and practical knowledge than people who've been here for years." Victoria leaned against the conference table. "I'm not doing you a favor, Emmanuel. This is a business decision. You understand both worlds, the technology and the context in which it needs to function." Emmanuel struggled to find words. "I am honored by your confidence." Victoria studied him for a moment. You know, when I first saw you cleaning that whiteboard and noticed your engineering correction, I thought I'd found a diamond in the rough. I was wrong. Emmanuel's heart sank slightly. You were never rough, Victoria continued. America just didn't recognize the diamond. That's our loss, not yours. Later that evening, Emmanuel sat in his small apartment trying to process the day's events. His laptop was open to an email from his former supervisor in Lagos, who had enthusiastically agreed to provide documentation of their projects together. On his phone was a message from the immigration lawyer, reporting positive movement on his visa application. A sharp knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he found Kwame standing there with a bottle of champagne and a wide grin. I heard the news, Kwame announced, pushing past Emmanuel into the apartment. Project leader after less than a year? You're making history, my friend. Emmanuel laughed, taking the bottle. News travels fast. Did Victoria call a press conference I wasn't aware of? Better. Aisha told her cousin, who told his roommate, who plays soccer with my brother. Kwame looked around the sparse apartment. Where do you keep your glasses? This calls for a proper toast. As Emmanuel found 2 mismatched mugs in his kitchen cabinet, he hadn't yet bothered to buy proper glassware. His phone rang. An unknown number with a Pennsylvania area code. His heart skipped a beat. Only one person from Pennsylvania had his number. Aren't you going to answer that? Kwame asked, noticing his hesitation. Emmanuel stared at the phone, then pressed decline. Wrong number, he said, though he suspected it wasn't. Now, about that toast. Later that night, after Kwame had left, Emmanuel checked his voicemail. Ayo. Woman's voice, hesitant and uncomfortable, confirmed his suspicion. Emmanuel, this is Margaret Wilson. I saw an article about you in the tech section of the Philadelphia Inquirer, about the immigrant engineer revolutionizing power solutions for developing markets. I recognized your name and, well, I wanted to reach out. Perhaps we could meet for coffee. I'd like to explain about what happened at the airport. My number is... Emmanuel deleted the message before she finished. Some bridges didn't need rebuilding. Some explanations came too late. The next morning, Emmanuel arrived at TechVision earlier than usual. The building was quiet, most employees still an hour from arrival. Out of habit, he found himself checking the break room, straightening chairs and wiping down counters. Old patterns died hard. Still can't resist cleaning up after everyone? Harold's voice came from the doorway. Emmanuel smiled at the facilities manager. Good morning, Harold, just keeping busy. Harold entered, coffee mug in hand. Heard you're heading up the Africa project now. Big responsibility. If the visa comes through, Emmanuel qualified. It will. Harold poured himself coffee. Victoria. Doesn't take no for an answer. Trust me on that. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Emmanuel had always appreciated Harold's straightforward manner, even when he'd been just a janitor. You know, Harold said eventually, when you first started here, I gave you advice about keeping your head down and not showing up the engineers. Worst advice I ever gave anyone. Emmanuel shook his head. You were trying to protect me. Maybe. Or maybe I'd been in the system so long I started believing in it. Harold sipped his coffee. Glad you didn't listen. As the building began to fill with arriving employees, Emmanuel made his way to his desk. His computer screen showed a calendar full of meetings, design reviews, strategy sessions, calls with potential Nigerian partners. A far cry from his cleaning schedule of just months ago, his email inbox held dozens of messages, but one stood out, from Victoria, sent at 3 a.m., with the subject line, Opportunity. He opened it immediately. Emmanuel, Diane Chen called after. Dinner. Horizon Partners wants to fast-track their investment with one condition. You become an equity partner in the venture. They're impressed with your vision for adapting our technology to emerging markets. This would mean partial ownership of TechVision's international division. Let's discuss details tomorrow. This could change everything. Emmanuel read the email 3 times, trying to absorb its implications. equity partner, ownership. These were words he had never imagined applying to himself in America, especially not less than a year after being abandoned at an airport. His phone buzzed with a text from his immigration lawyer. Great news. USCIS expediting your application based on national interest waiver consideration. Victoria's recommendation letter did wonders. Call me. Emmanuel set down his phone and looked out the window at the city skyline, gleaming in the morning light. The buildings looked different to him now, not intimidating monuments to someone else's success, but structures built by people who had once been where he was, starting with nothing but determination and vision. The office around him buzzed with activity, colleagues greeting each other, discussing weekend plans, complaining about traffic. Normal life. His life now, though it still felt strange sometimes, like wearing someone else's clothes. His computer pinged with a meeting reminder. Nigerian Telecom Partnership Strategy, 10 a.m., Conference Room A. Emmanuel gathered his notes and headed toward the conference room where, months ago, he had watched presentations from behind one-way glass, invisible and voiceless. Now he would be leading the meeting, his voice the one that others would follow. Not because someone had given him permission to speak, but because he had earned the right to be heard. As he walked through TechVision's halls, Emmanuel passed a cleaning cart parked near the elevator. The new janitor, a young Hispanic woman, with determined eyes, was carefully wiping down the directory sign. She glanced up as he passed, then quickly looked down again as if apologizing for being noticed. Emmanuel stopped. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I'm Emmanuel Okafor, Engineering Department." She looked surprised at being addressed. "Maria Diaz," she replied cautiously. "The break room on the third floor has a leaky faucet," he told her. "Maintenance should fix it, but they're always behind schedule. If you report things directly to Harold, they get fixed faster." Maria's expression shifted from confusion to cautious appreciation. "Thank you for the advice, sir." "Not sir," Emmanuel corrected gently. "Just Emmanuel. We're colleagues." As he continued toward his meeting, Emmanuel felt Maria's confused gaze, following him. He understood her surprise. In a world that sorted people into categories, visible and invisible, valuable and disposable, simple recognition could feel revolutionary. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the lawyer. "Paperwork coming through. Congratulations, soon to be permanent resident." Emmanuel paused in the hallway, overwhelmed for a moment. Permanent resident. The words represented security, legitimacy, belonging, everything he had sought when he first boarded that plane in Lagos. But as he entered the conference room where his team waited, Emmanuel realized something important had shifted inside him. The papers, the titles, the recognition, they mattered, yes. But his value had never depended on them. It had been there all along, waiting for the right eyes to see it. The Lagos heat wrapped around Emmanuel like an old, familiar blanket as he stepped off the airplane. 3 years had passed since he'd left Nigeria, boarding a flight with a one-way ticket and uncertain dreams. Now he returned as TechVision International's Director of African Operations, leading a team of 20 engineers and business specialists on a 2-week trip to launch their new regional headquarters. "Welcome home, sir," said the customs officer, examining his American permanent resident card alongside his Nigerian passport. "Business or pleasure?" "Both," Emmanuel replied with a smile. Outside the airport, the chaos of Lagos traffic and the symphony of honking horns greeted him like an enthusiastic relative. The driver Victoria had arranged held a sign with the TechVision logo, a stylized light bulb merged with the African continent, designed for their international division. Emmanuel's American colleagues looked overwhelmed by the sensory assault of Lagos, the colors, sounds, smells, and relentless energy of 20 million people pursuing survival and success with equal determination. He watched their faces with amusement, remembering his own culture shock when he'd first arrived in America. "Is it always this intense?" asked Aisha, who despite her Nigerian heritage had never visited her parents' homeland. "This is actually a calm day," Emmanuel teased. "Wait until the market women start singing their sales pitches." Their convoy of 3 vehicles navigated the complicated route from the airport to Victoria Island, where TechVision had leased a building for their new headquarters. Along the way, Emmanuel pointed out landmarks, explaining the city's complicated geography to his colleagues. "Tomorrow we'll have our first meeting with the telecommunications partners," he explained as they approached their hotel. "Then a press conference announcing our manufacturing initiative. The governor of Lagos State will attend. He's very interested in our job creation potential." The next morning, Emmanuel woke before dawn, jet lag working in his favor for once. He stood on his hotel balcony watching the city come alive, street vendors setting up stalls, office workers beginning their commutes, fishing boats returning with night catches. His city. Despite the years away, Lagos still pumped through his veins like a second bloodstream. His phone chimed with a message from his mother. "Breakfast at 8? Brought your favorite moi." Emmanuel grinned. His mother had arrived from her village yesterday, insisting on staying at the hotel despite his offer to arrange a house. "I want to see my son in his element," she had said. "Show me this company." That was smart enough to recognize what I always knew. At breakfast, his mother wore her finest traditional wrapper, pride radiating from her like sunlight. She had aged since he'd left, more gray in her hair, deeper lines around her eyes. But her spirit remained undiminished. "You look like your father now," she said, studying his face across the table. "He would be strutting like a peacock to see you return this way." Emmanuel smiled at the thought of his late father, who had sacrificed so much to ensure his education. "I wish he could have seen it." "Oh, he sees," his mother said confidently, pressing more food onto his plate. "Now tell me about this Victoria woman. When will I meet the one who changed my son's fortune?" "She arrives tomorrow for the official opening. And she didn't change my fortune, Mama. She simply recognized what was already there." His mother waved this distinction away. "Same thing. Without eyes that see, value means nothing. Like your grandfather's land that had oil beneath it but brought only yams until the right people came looking." After breakfast, Emmanuel headed to the new TechVision building for final preparations. The space impressed even by Lagos standards. 5 floors of gleaming architecture with solar panels covering the roof and a rainwater collection system feeding the air conditioning. Most importantly, the building housed a state-of-the-art assembly facility where local workers would build the company's adaptive power systems using both imported and locally sourced components. As Emmanuel walked through the factory floor, supervising the final equipment installations, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Victoria's name. "I thought you weren't arriving until tomorrow," he answered. "Change of plans," Victoria's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "I'm bringing guests. Important ones. How's everything looking?" "On schedule," Emmanuel assured her. The EI governor confirmed for the ceremony. "Local media is already requesting interviews. Your accommodations are arranged." "Perfect. We land at 9 p.m. "Oh, and Emmanuel?" Victoria paused. "Thank you for making this happen. The board is already calling the African expansion our most promising venture in years." After ending the call, Emmanuel continued his inspection with renewed energy. 3 years ago, he had been grateful for the opportunity to clean floors at TechVision. Now he was opening their first international headquarters, bringing jobs and innovative technology to his homeland. The journey between those 2 points still amazed him. That evening, Emmanuel stood in the arrivals area of the same airport where his own journey had begun. Victoria emerged from customs looking remarkably fresh despite the long flight. Behind her came Diane Chen from Horizon Partners and 2 other investors Emmanuel recognized from previous meetings. "Welcome to Lagos," he greeted them. "How was your flight?" "Long," Victoria admitted with a smile, "but worth it to see this project come to life. Any fires that need putting out before tomorrow?" "Everything is proceeding as planned," Emmanuel assured her. "Though as planned in Nigeria always includes some improvisation." Diane Chen stepped forward. "The market response has been even stronger than we projected. Your connections here have been invaluable." Emmanuel nodded in acknowledgement. "What Diane called connections, he called community, the network of relationships that made things possible in Nigeria." His understanding of these nuances had proven just as valuable as his technical expertise. On the drive to the hotel, Victoria explained a change to the next day's schedule. The U.S. ambassador wants to attend the opening. Apparently, we're becoming a poster child for American business partnerships in West Africa. Emmanuel absorbed this information thoughtfully. That will please the governor. He's keen to attract more foreign investment. It's not just about the money, Victoria noted, looking out at the Lagos skyline illuminated against the night sky. It's about creating sustainable models that benefit both sides. That's what you've helped us design here, Emmanuel. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a good omen in Nigerian tradition. Emmanuel arrived at the TechVision building early, overseeing final preparations for the ceremony. The factory floor had been transformed with chairs arranged before a small stage. Nigerian and American flags stood side by side behind the podium. By 10 o'clock, the space buzzed with activity. Government officials in elaborate traditional attire mingled with executives in business suits. Local employees, newly hired and trained, stood proudly in their TechVision uniforms. Journalists positioned cameras and tested microphones. Emmanuel's mother sat in the front row exchanging pleasantries with Victoria, who had taken an immediate liking to the older woman. They made an unlikely pair, the American tech CEO and the village matriarch, but they shared a fundamental quality Emmanuel had benefited from in both women: the ability to see potential where others saw only limitations. As the ceremony began, Emmanuel found himself called to the stage earlier than expected. Victoria had altered the program. "Before we hear from our distinguished guests," she said into the microphone, "I want to introduce the person who made today possible." 3 years ago, Emmanuel Okafor joined TechVision as a member of our facilities team. Today, he stands before you as our Director of African Operations and a key architect of our international strategy. The crowd applauded politely, though Emmanuel noticed confusion on some faces. The journey from janitor to executive didn't fit the expected narrative. Victoria continued, "Emmanuel brought more than technical expertise to our company. He brought perspective. He showed us how to adapt our technology to serve markets we barely understood. His insight transformed our approach and opened doors we didn't know existed." As Victoria spoke, Emmanuel noticed a familiar face in the second row. Dr. Adeyemi, his former professor from University of Lagos, nodded in recognition. Emmanuel had invited him personally, wanting to thank the man whose recommendation had helped him secure his engineering position in Nigeria years ago, the first step on his long path. When Emmanuel stepped to the microphone, he felt the weight of the moment, standing in his homeland as a returning son, changed by his experiences yet still fundamentally shaped by the country of his birth. "Today represents a circle completed," he began. "The technology we build here addresses challenges I experienced growing up in Lagos: power outages that disrupted education, unreliable systems that made business difficult. But these challenges also taught invaluable lessons about adaptation and resilience." He paused, looking at the faces before him, Nigerian and American, unified in this venture. This facility represents more than economic opportunity. It represents the power of perspective. When different viewpoints come together, innovation follows. TechVision recognized that value, and together we have created something that serves both our communities. The rest of the ceremony proceeded according to plan. Speeches from officials, a ribbon cutting, tours of the facility. Emmanuel moved through it all in a state of controlled wonder, occasionally catching his mother's eye as she beamed with unrestrained pride. During the reception afterward, Dr. Adeyemi approached him with a warm handshake. "When you left for America, I worried," the professor admitted. "So many brilliant minds go and never return even to visit, but you found a way to bridge both worlds." "I had good teachers," Emmanuel replied sincerely, "both here and there." The event wound down, Emmanuel was called to the entrance to greet a late-arriving guest. To his surprise, he found himself face-to-face with Margaret Wilson. She looked exactly as he remembered from the airport 3 years ago. Blonde hair in a neat bob, expensive clothes, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. but now she clutched a leather portfolio and a business card identifying her as representing a real estate investment firm. "Emmanuel," she said, her voice falsely bright. "What an amazing coincidence running into you here." It was no coincidence, of course. She had obviously heard about the Tech Vision opening and arranged to attend, perhaps seeing business opportunities for her firm, or perhaps seeking some kind of personal redemption. "Margaret," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "What brings you to Lagos?" "Business opportunities," she confirmed. "My firm is exploring investment possibilities in high-end residential developments. When I heard about this event, I thought it might be a good networking opportunity." She paused awkwardly. "I tried calling you a couple years ago to apologize." "I remember," Emmanuel said simply. She shifted uncomfortably under his steady gaze. I made a terrible mistake that day at the airport. I've regretted it ever since." Emmanuel considered her words. The woman who had once rejected him based solely on his skin color now stood before him seeking, what exactly? Forgiveness? Business connections? The moral comfort of being absolved? "We all make choices," he said finally. "Some lead to dead ends, others open unexpected paths." He gestured toward the buzzing reception inside. "I should return to my guests." As he turned to leave, Margaret called after him. "Emmanuel, wait. I was hoping we might discuss potential collaborations. My clients would be very interested in housing near your facility for executives." He paused and looked back at her. "Our community relations team would be happy to provide you with information about local partners." He handed her a business card, not his personal one, but the general contact for Tech Vision Nigeria. Her face fell slightly as she understood the message. Whatever personal connection she sought would not be forthcoming. Emmanuel felt no satisfaction in her disappointment, only a quiet acknowledgement that some bridges, once burned, need not be rebuilt. Inside, Emmanuel found Victoria speaking with his mother, both women laughing like old friends. "There you are," Victoria said as he approached. "Your mother has been telling me stories about your childhood science experiments. Apparently you were reverse engineering radios at age 10. Emmanuel smiled, "and causing power outages in the process, which prepared you perfectly for designing systems that prevent them," his mother added proudly. "Life prepares us in strange ways for our purpose." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the cleanup crews had finished their work, Emmanuel stood alone on the rooftop of the Tech Vision building. Lagos spread before him, a vast constellation of lights shimmering in the darkness. Some areas glowed brightly with reliable power, others flickered with the uncertainty that had defined his youth. The door opened behind him. Victoria joined him, at the railing, looking out over the city. "Quite a view," she remarked. "It will be even better when more of those lights stay on consistently," Emmanuel replied. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, employer and employee, partners in an unlikely success story. "I saw Margaret Wilson at the reception," Victoria said finally. "Harold mentioned what happened with her when you first arrived. Why you were working as a janitor to begin with." Emmanuel tensed slightly. He had never discussed Margaret with Victoria in detail, preferring to leave that humiliation in the past. "It doesn't matter now," he said. "It matters because it's part of your story," Victoria countered gently. "And because I want you to know something. When I offered you that first consulting opportunity, it wasn't charity or pity. It was the best business decision I ever made." Emmanuel smiled in the darkness. "I know that now, though I wasn't so sure then. My grandmother had a saying," Victoria continued. "She grew up in Mississippi picking cotton before moving north, during the Great Migration. She used to tell me, 'Baby, don't worry about the ones who can't see your light. Just shine brighter until you find the ones with better eyes.'" Emmanuel nodded, thinking of his own grandmother's similar wisdom. Different continents, similar truths. "I'm expanding the African initiative," Victoria said, changing the subject. "Kenya, Ghana, Ethiopia. We need someone overseeing the entire continental strategy." She turned to face him. "I'd like you to become Chief Innovation Officer for Tech Vision Global. It would mean dividing your time between Lagos and our headquarters, building teams in multiple countries." Emmanuel absorbed the offer. Another step, another expansion of possibility. You don't need to answer now, Victoria added, but I wanted you to know the opportunity is there. After she left, Emmanuel remained on the rooftop, considering the path that had brought him to this moment. From abandoned fiancé to janitor to engineer to executive, a journey that seemed impossible on that first day at the American airport. His phone buzzed with a text from Kwame. Saw the ceremony pictures online. From cleaning their toilets to running their African division. You've come full circle, my friend, so proud. Emmanuel smiled and typed back. No circles, only spirals, moving upward. Below him, the lights of Lagos continued their dance, some steady, some flickering, all part of the complex ecosystem of his homeland. Tomorrow he would visit his mother's village, showing his American colleagues the places that had shaped him. Next week, they would begin interviewing engineers for the expansion teams. The month after, he would return to America to present their progress to the board. Two worlds, no longer separate but interwoven. Two perspectives, each enriching the other. Emmanuel tucked his phone away and took one last look at the city before heading downstairs. Margaret's rejection had once seemed like the end of his American dream. Now he recognized it as the necessary beginning of a different, more authentic story, one written not by others' expectations but by his own resilient spirit. The true value Margaret couldn't see had been recognized by Victoria, yes. But more importantly, it had always been there, waiting to emerge. Like the adaptive technology he had helped create, designed to function not despite challenging conditions, but because of the wisdom gained from navigating them. As Emmanuel locked the rooftop door behind him, he felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with buildings or ceremonies. His worth had never depended on anyone else's ability to see it. But finding those who did see it, that had made all the difference.